This is Ryan Elliott for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. We're back in the best city in the world today, Newcastle. Eddie Hearn, April 4th, big night of action for the North East. I don't live up here, I'm from up here. Yeah, so welcome back to the greatest part of the world.
I was going to say, not a lot of travelling for you, but you come up from London. You live in London?
Yeah, just north of. I drove up this morning, but I'm never going to complain about coming back to this glorious city. Anyway, Lewis Ritson, the pride of Newcastle, back against Miguel Vasquez. Let's start there. Miguel Vasquez, someone who's hard to look good against, operated at a very high level. Why this fight? Why now?
I think really because we need to see if Lewis Ritson's ready for the world level. And, you know, I think Robbie Davies Jr. is a fantastic fighter, but in terms of the confidence inside for Lewis Ritson, you know, a couple of times I've mentioned kind of Josh Taylor and he's like, oh yeah, but this is like, you need that step between the big domestic fights and that world championship level. And I think Miguel Vasquez is the perfect guy to do it. You know, he's a former 135-pound world champion. He was one of the most avoided world champions that I think we've seen. When he was lightweight champion, I remember we had Ricky Burns, and there was all the talk before that about Burns avoiding him. You know, there was Adrian Broner, who I know was avoiding him at the time for a unification fight. He has a tricky style, but I think as he's got a little bit older, he's changed that style a little bit. He's come to fight a lot more. And you saw in the O'Hara Davis fight, I mean, won that fight quite comfortably as far as I'm concerned. He's still got a lot left, just coming off another win. And I think it's a really good test for Lewis Ritson. I think it's a real banana skin, to be honest with you, because against someone that's just going to walk forward in straight lines, Lewis Ritson's always going to look fantastic. You saw in the Patera fight against someone that does box and move, it becomes a little bit more difficult and dangerous. And I think this is a really dangerous fight, particularly bearing in mind his position.
I was going to ask you about Vasquez. He's someone who, as you mentioned, held that lightweight title for about 4 years, I think it was. He's been on the wrong end of a couple of stinkers in his time. The Mickey Bay fight, obviously O'Hara Davis last time out. I know he and his team have made a conscious effort to try and make him a bit more of an aggressive fighter. Do you think he'll bring it a bit more in this fight because of that?
Yeah, I think he has to, and I think he hasn't really got a lot to lose anymore. Like, I feel like when he was at 135-pound, he was almost not unbeatable, but he had that style that was very, very tough to beat. And I think now, where he hasn't got as much to lose, and he's on the road, and he's not a champion, he has to do a little bit more. And I actually like the way he's doing it. I mean, I remember when Josh Taylor made the fight with Josh Taylor against Miguel Vasquez. I'm thinking about the old Miguel Vasquez, and I'm thinking, oh, this ain't going to be a great fight. It was a really good fight. And Vasquez boxed well in that fight, and Josh Taylor, eventually got him out of there. But when you look at his recent fights, he's completely switched up his style and has now come to fight a little bit more. But he's very, very clever, and he can box and move. And I think it's no secret, is it, that probably most people think that if you box and move against Lewis Ritson, you've got a better chance than if you're standing in front of him. So maybe he'll try and do that, but I do think he'll try and mix it up.
With Lewis, we've sort of been here before where we're saying he's on the cusp of this and the cusp of that, stadium fights, world title fights, etc. We were there before the Patera fight. We're here again. How important is it that, and I'm sure he is, that he takes this challenge fully seriously, regardless of whether Vasquez is in his perhaps twilight stage of his career?
When you sit next to people and you go through the journey with them, you can see how they change as individuals. I mean, I was joking about Joe Laws, but it's true. But even more so with Lewis Ritson. When he first sat here with Highland and Patera, you could tell he was like a little bit nervous. It was how he'd deal with it. Now it's just like business. He's come to the press. They probably don't even really want to be at the press conference. Just wants to be at the gym. Working towards making sure he wins this fight. He's number 2 with the WBA. For me, he can take that fight with Josh Taylor virtually whenever he wants it, because I feel like that's a big British fight. It's going to draw a huge crowd. But I do feel that he feels, and his team feels, that he needs to take that step to establish world level. And this is what he will do against Miguel Vasquez.
Moving on elsewhere on the bill, big night for North East boxing. Savannah Marshall, she's moving up to light heavyweight. She's got that world title shot. How good a time is this women's boxing? Obviously, we saw Terry Harper last week, unbelievable atmosphere, and Savannah Marshall has the chance to sort of do this in front of her own people as well.
You know that women's boxing, it's kind of like a little bit of a novelty act when it started. There's a women's fight on the card. What's all this about? I remember when Katie Taylor made her pro debut at Wembley, people were like, oh, women's boxing? Oh, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Now, we have a women's fight on every single card. Last week, arguably the best atmosphere of the night was the Terry Harper fight. It was one of the best atmospheres I've seen on a Saturday night fight night. Forget a co-main event for a chief support event. And I just love the stories. I feel that, as a promoter and as a marketeer, whatever you want to call me, I feel that the storylines and the narratives of fighters are what makes them popular, and that's how you sell things. With someone like Terry Harper, I feel that is so much easier for me to sell. Maybe because it's unique, maybe because there aren't many. Maybe it's because it's a woman who used to work in a chip shop who found amateur boxing again because she watched Katie Taylor and she inspired her to give it a go, and she went back with her amateur trainers and Steffi Ball found his $1 million baby. You know, that's the narrative of Terry Harper, and I feel, how can you not love Terry Harper? Like, I mean, how can you not love Katie Taylor? And I think as people start to learn more about Savannah Marshall, they'll feel exactly the same way as well. So the thought process behind this is super middleweight and middleweight, all the world champions are tied up at the moment. So I said to her, how do you feel about going to 175? And she said, well, not really on my radar. I said, what if I got you a world title fight? We went out, we reached out to the WBO world champion from New Zealand. She was up for it, the deal was done, and now she challenges for a world title. I could have got her a vacant world title at 175. Not the same. Beat the champion, become world champion, move down to super middle, move down to middle. She's got a chance to become a multi-weight world champion over the next couple of years and start moving towards the Clarissa Shields fight. And I think that it's it's an important time for her. This other girl, I was joking about when she got on the stage. She says, "I'm about the same size as your opponent." She's a big girl, she's 175 pound who's boxed heavier than that, 180, 185. Savannah at 168, she's not really refueling beyond 170. So this is going to be a tough fight. She's got bundles more skill than this girl. She will have bundles more skill than 99% of the women she faces. But the size difference is going to be interesting, particularly the power and stepping up against, like I said, a bigger girl, but a world champion.
Also on this bill, he's just on the poster behind you there. Joe Law's starting to garner a lot of attention in the Northeast. Last time, it was only meant to be a float fight. It ended up captivating the crowd. He sold a lot of tickets. Joe told me after that fight with Justice Addy, it was obviously a tear-up that he probably didn't need at this stage of his career, that you had a word with him away from the cameras, had a bit of a private chat and told him to box a bit more and to maybe just sort of take it a bit more seriously.
It's hard because for me, what I want is entertainment in the arena. But I also want young fighters or people that I like to have every chance to try and succeed. And if I can pass on any knowledge that might help them, like Joe Laws, and my advice to that was, mate, you've got to calm down. Because that kid was dangerous, he boxed last time. I mean, they were trading up at times. It only takes one mistake and you go to sleep in this sport. And then all this, support that you've got, all these mad people running around and wearing Joe Laws hats and T-shirts, they're gone. And you'll wake up in the morning, they won't be there anymore. So don't blow it at this stage. He's always going to be exciting. He's never going to be boring to watch, but don't be reckless all the time. So, I think he's kind of like established this position as a float fighter on our shows now. And he will be again on April the 4th because he is brilliant TV. Brilliant TV. And that's what we're producing. We're trying to produce great atmospheres in the arena. We're trying to produce great live events on TV. And Joe Laws adds a lot to that. And he sells about 1,000 tickets as well. So, he's part of that atmosphere and creating that atmosphere that's very important to the Newcastle events.
Elsewhere on the bill, obviously, we've got Wardley Valili, Cash Farouk on there as well. Cash can't be here today, but exciting future ahead for him. Final thing on this bill.
Yeah, really excited because Cash Farouk, I feel like, is a future world champion. I really do. And I watched the Lee McGregor fight, and I was watching it thinking, wow, this kid's really good. And the bell went, and they went to it, and they gave it to Lee McGregor, who is a really good fighter. And it was a close fight. But for me, Cash Farouk was the comfortable winner in that fight. And I just sort of thought to myself, if I don't do something, he's probably going to be the forgotten man. So maybe it was a little bit of, it's a challenge for me. But I got straight onto Ian Wilson. I said, I want to sign Cash Farouk. He come down to the office. We signed Cash Farouk. He's a good fighter. He'll fight straight back for a title on this card. You got him. You got Thomas Patrick Ward as well, who's on the verge of a world title fight. Wardley Valili is a really good fight. Wardley, I think, is a good talent. Obviously, Dillian White managed, but never had a proper fight. Now he has a proper fight against Simon Valili, who's a tough fucker, to be honest with you. A tough fucker. And he's got a real crazy moustache now as well, which scares me a little bit.
A couple of things away from this bill. Did you see Jamal Charlo's response to yourself and Demetrius Andrade?
Queer, I was saying. Yeah, nice. I've always been a Charlo fan. It's really confusing because I kind of tell you exactly the truth of what's happened. So I messaged him and said, I'd like to make you an offer. And he said, great, send it over to me. So I said, all right, send it over to him. This is in the early days. Then I went back and said, I've got another offer for you to fight Andrade. Cool, email it over. Here's my email. So I'll send the email over and he goes quiet. Okay? in the meantime, he's doing all the interviews under the sun, telling people he's his own boss, and Lions only promotion is the boss and the king, and etc. And then he does another interview going, "Why are you sending me an offer? Send it to Al Heyman." It's like, well, I would have done if you would have told me to send it to Al Heyman, but you asked me to email it to you at Lions Only Promotions. So very strange. I mean, he's turned down now 3 times his highest ever purse to fight Demetrius Andrade in a unification. I don't know what else you can do, what else you can say. Happy to send it to Al Heyman. But is that going to make a difference? No, probably not, because they don't want to take him off Fox. So we will give you Demetrius Andrade to fight on Fox. It's no problem. Just make him an offer.
A couple of other things before I let you go. We're sort of waiting for the heavyweight division to have a set schedule at the minute. Usyk Chisora, a bit of sort of talk of whether he is injured or what have you. When can we expect to see that, May?
He's not injured. Basically, when he came out the Chaz Witherspoon fight, he needed a bit of rehab on his elbow. He asked if we minded delaying it to the end of April. The end of April doesn't work for us date-wise, so we're moving it to May. So I had a lot of calls from people over the last 48 hours. Oh, is Usyk injured? It's like, well, not really. He probably was about 4 weeks ago, but he's training. He's in camp now for that fight. That fight is virtually done. Dillian White against Povetkin will be announced next week, and Joshua Pulev is, the terms are agreed, and now we got to decide where we're going to do it, and it's going to be in London.
Final one before I let you go, Eddie. I appreciate there's a lot of people waiting to speak to you. Deontay Wilder had his media call yesterday, had his rematch with Tyson Fury. Outright refused to speak about Anthony Joshua. Did you see that, and what do you make of it?
Well, he said that he's got no interest in Joshua because Joshua's irrelevant. How can Joshua be irrelevant? He holds 4 belts in the heavyweight division, and he's got 1. This is the same story we've heard from Deontay Wilder for a long time, so I hope Tyson Fury does the business, because Fury will fight AJ. No doubt about that. It's just a 5-minute conversation with me, MTK and Bob Arum. That fight gets done. We'll see what happens, but disappointing from Wilder, and I don't know why he does it. He don't do himself any favours, but let's see if he wins next week.
Eddie, thank you as always for making time for Boxing Social. See you soon.